Without change, something sleeps inside us. The sleeper must awaken.
Welcome back to another We Ourselves video. And today I want to talk about Recast T'Challa. But in particular, I want to talk about a quote that's going around from the John Campia show. And we know that John Campia has been on board for Recast T'Challa for a while. But apparently, Kris Carr, one of his co-hosts, she recently came out and she said that she understands the need for the recasting and she's on board.
And after so many years, I feel like you do have to bring T'Challa back into the mix here because that character is just so important. He's so important to this film or this film series and everything. I think you need to have him back in here. You know, listening to E-Man's reviews and everything has made such a great case for why we need T'Challa.
Now, I will give John credit. He stopped there and he says, but we're not talking about aging up the child, Toussaint. We're talking about recasting the character of T'Challa. And so I give John props for that. Now, I used to be a fan of his show and I used to watch it all the time, but I kind of fell out from watching it because of some of his other attitudes and views on other things. But I will say he runs a good show. Okay? As somebody who was in television production, he runs a good show. But anyway, shout out to Brother Theo over at I Ain't Saying I'm Just Saying YouTube channel because I watched his response and I totally agree with him, but I want to come at it from another way. He primarily focused on why are we so happy that white people are finally saying what they have been saying for 4 years. And he's absolutely right. Those that have been in the Recast T'Challa, particularly those that have been on the front lines, and have been doing videos and topics and talking about Recast T'Challa. They have been saying this all along, and so now we're supposed to be happy that Eric Voss and now Kris Carr and all these other people now agree with the need to recast T'Challa. No, and I agree with Brother Theo. It's like, no, we don't need that because all they're doing is sliding in and they're going to take it over. What I want to come from is one of the comments that Kris Carr made, and people are kind of skipping over this. She mentioned that E-Man, who's been on the front line and who did the petition, which I signed up for, she said that he finally convinced her of the need to recast T'Challa. And for me, that was my sticking point with the whole thing. Because it's like, why do we have to explain anything to you? Why did E-Man have to convince you, Kris Carr, that there was a need to recast T'Challa? And that's my problem with the whole thing. Aside from these people now coming in and because they say it, now everybody can see it, why do we have to constantly explain the obvious to people outside of our group? Basically, it's the same old thing of us having to prove ourselves, prove what we said, prove our credentials, prove our ability, prove our ideas. We are constantly called to have to prove that to other people as if we have to constantly prove our existence in this country. And that's a common thing that goes across the line. We have to do it at work. Unless we can work for ourselves, we have to do it for work all the time. There's a reason that Black professionals in particular have worse health outcomes, even when they have the A1 insurance and even when they have the money to pay for top-notch care. When you eliminate all those other things, Black professionals still have worse health outcomes. Why? Because of the anxiety that we have with us when we walk around and we have to constantly be on guard to prove ourselves to people who regularly come at us. Even people who know us still come at us, and so we're having to explain ourselves. We're having to prove ourselves. We're having to document what we're doing. And when Kris Carr said that E-Man finally convinced her, it's like, why the hell do we have to convince you? Because it was so obvious. When the standard order of doing things is to recast a character, particularly a character who's heading a popular and financially successful franchise, they would never, ever, ever consider not recasting the main character in a successful franchise. It's common sense. It's done day in and day out. And we see examples of it. And she saw examples of it because, like I said, I watched the show and they talked about all the examples of people who died and how they were recast. So why did E-Man have to convince her that T'Challa needed to be recast? It's the same old thing that goes on in this country. There's a certain group of people who feel like it's their right to make us prove ourselves, even when what we're saying is the common sense thing, and it's the thing that they themselves just did in another example. But when it comes to us, again, I say it all the time, it's like there's this programming that goes off inside of them, and they marginalize, undervalue, and underestimate our opinions, what we say, what we do, what we think, what we create. When she says that E-Man finally convinced her, as if you're some arbiter of what needs to be done in terms of Recast T'Challa. It was the right thing to do. There's nobody out there who would have agreed with Marvel if after the first Iron Man and Kevin Feige went to John Favreau and he says, great job, but you know what? Iron Man's a mantle, so we're going to move the mantle to Pepper Potts. We're going to move it to Rhodey because he's done it before. So that's what we're going to do. Now, you'll still be Tony Stark. Robert Downey Jr. will still be Tony Stark, but we're going to move the mantle of Iron Man to another character in the next movie. They would never have done that, and they didn't do that. And even me saying it sounds ridiculous. There's no way that they would have gone to Chris Evans after the first Captain America and say, hey, Chris, you did a great job, but we're going to move the mantle to Captain Britain. We're going to let Peggy Carter play it. You'll still be Steve Rogers, and you'll have a lot to contribute, but we're going to move the mantle. We're going to give the shield to Captain Britain. They wouldn't do that. Neither would they do that with Thor. It wasn't until the fourth movie, ironically, which a lot of people don't like as much, that they actually brought in another Thor. But guess what? He was still there, and he still had his own hammer. He had Stormbreaker. So even there, they did not take the mantle from Thor. They just brought in Lady Thor. So it's like, you wouldn't think of doing that with white characters. You recast in a second, particularly if it's a successful franchise. Black Panther, the first one, made $1.3 million. Still more than any solo hero movie in the MCU. And to this day, like I said, it made more domestically than Avengers Infinity War. So if there ever was a franchise and a lead character that you would recast so that you could keep the success going, it would be that. But suddenly, everybody loses their mind. No, we can't do that. They turn logic upside down to explain why you don't do the obvious in the thing that you do in every other situation. For somebody who's in the field and who talks about this entertainment stuff almost every day, 5 days a week, she did know that. It's just that they didn't care, and they turned logic on its head because that's what they're used to doing when it comes to us. There was no reason for E-Man to have to convince her, and it's one of the reasons why I don't watch the John Campia show anymore. I couldn't take the smugness on some of the topic. I know the world we live in, but we shouldn't have to convince anybody of what's common sense. We shouldn't have to convince anybody of what the standard operating procedure is. That's why I do my videos. That's why I complain about Falcon as much as I do. It's not that I don't like the character, but what I'm saying is, when it comes to a leading heterosexual male in this series in the MCU, you always give them certain character beats to help establish audience connection with them. Their standard story writing techniques, their standard script writing techniques. And you didn't give any of that to Sam, which means you had to break your own normal process in order to make him a shell of a character. Same thing with the black women in the MCU. Every other woman that's in there, even the other ones of color, they always have a dad moment, okay? And they have all these other moments, which I detailed in my video. But when it comes to the black female characters, it's like you have to break your process. That vaunted Marvel process that everybody's supposed to love and fall in line with. But when it comes to the black characters, you break it. Or do you? Is that also part of your process? It's a sub-process that kicks in when you have a black character, male or female. So no, nobody needed to convince Kris Carr of anything, let alone E-Man, because she's in the business and knows better. So anyway, that's my comments on it. That's my rant and rave. As always, hit the like button, share it, and subscribe if you haven't. And thank you for all of the subscribers who have subscribed and who comment on my videos. I appreciate it. And I will see you the next time.
The sleeper has awakened!